Hey guys, tonight we begin with something dry, scratchy, and utterly flammable. You're standing in a medieval village, nose filled with the scent of hay, sheep, and something singed. The cottages are cozy, yes, but their roofs, oh, just bundles of sun-dried kindling waiting for the slightest spark. A single misplaced ember could send half the village into chaos. You probably won't survive this, unless you happen to be holding a bucket, a prayer, and an uncanny talent for not panicking. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk down a dirt-packed lane, barefoot or in sandals so thin they might as well be hope. Around you, cottages huddle close like nervous hens. The walls are wattle and daub, woven sticks caked in mud, straw, and whatever else was lying around. And above them, thatched roofs. Beautiful, rustic, and approximately as fireproof as a box of matches in a thunderstorm. You glance up, and it's there. The slow, steady creep of smoke curling from a roof. Someone's chimney got ambitious. You don't even wait, you shout, and the alarm spreads faster than the fire itself. Doors slam open, villagers pour out. No sirens. Just a lot of yelling and the sudden realization that you forgot where the well is. The thing about thatch is, it's sneaky. Fires don't always start with a dramatic whoosh. Sometimes they smolder quietly, heat spreading through dry straw before finally bursting into flame like a dramatic actor who missed their cue. And when it goes, it goes. Sparks fly. Birds flee. Children scream. Dogs do that unhelpful thing where they bark at the flames instead of fetching water. You sprint toward the house, heart pounding. It smells like burning toast, sweaty goats, and panic. The family is already outside, which is good, although one of the chickens has chosen this moment to claim the house as her final resting place. You mentally say goodbye to the chicken. Without modern insulation or fire-resistant materials, medieval homes were like tinderboxes stacked in a pattern called, "Good luck, you'll need it." Some villages had narrow alleys that acted like wind tunnels, funneling flames from one thatch crown to the next in a sort of smoky game of hopscotch. Once one went up, others followed like loyal friends, or very flammable dominoes. Villagers had little time to prepare. Fires weren't rare. If it wasn't your chimney, it could be a neighbor's bread oven or an oil lamp that tipped over during evening prayers. Sometimes it was lightning, because nature also liked to throw in surprises. And because roofs were made from straw, which was harvested, dried, and then piled overhead like a practical joke, even a small spark could spell doom. And you couldn't just throw water at it, not because that was a bad idea, but because water wasn't exactly on tap. Wells were central, but buckets were made of wood or leather and could leak, splinter, or just go missing. Sometimes the only available bucket was a helmet or your own hands. You'd think they'd build a better system. They didn't. Historians still argue whether communities actively ignored fire risk or just had bigger problems, like famine, plague, and deciding whether that weird mushroom was edible or a hallucination. And yet, villagers had their little tricks. Sometimes they kept the roof damp during heat waves. Other times they installed fire hooks, long poles with metal claws, to yank down burning thatch before it could spread. You can picture yourself on a roof, swinging a pole at your own home like it insulted your mother. Desperate times, desperate hobbies. There were rules, too. Some towns banned open flames during dry seasons. Others designated one poor soul as the fire warden, basically a guy with a stick and an attitude. His job was to patrol at night, sniffing for smoke and praying he didn't have to do anything serious. Spoiler, he usually did. Quirky fact incoming: some villagers believed that keeping cats reduced fire risk. Why? Because cats chased rats, and rats chewed through things, including ropes and thatch. Less rodent damage meant fewer fire hazards. So, in a roundabout way, your tabby was medieval insurance. But nothing stopped a blaze once it took hold. Fire didn't politely wait for you to get your shoes. If you were lucky, you could rescue a few valuables, a cooking pot, a religious relic, maybe that one pillow that didn't itch. If you were unlucky, you watched your life turn to ash while a pig tried to run back inside, because pigs are weird like that. You take a breath. The roof is ablaze, but the neighbors have arrived. They're forming a bucket chain, one of the most primitive but effective techniques. Water sloshes from person to person, sometimes spilling more than it saves. It's messy, chaotic, and no one's wearing shoes, but it might work. Then again, it might not. As night falls, the fire glows like a beacon, an accidental signal that says, "Don't come here, we're on fire." It's hard to sleep afterward. You stare at your ceiling, wondering if a spark landed while you were distracted. You listen for creaks, sniff the air, and keep your shoes nearby. Just in case. Because in the medieval world, danger didn't always wear a sword or a crown. Sometimes it fell from your own hearth, crept up your roof, and left you with nothing but soot-stained memories. You're already running. The smoke hasn't even settled from the thatch fire, and the village bell is now swinging wildly, clanging like a metallic banshee. It's not musical. It's not rhythmic. It's just loud, exactly what it needs to be. You'd never guess that this awkward, bird nest-encrusted bell tower, used mostly to mark mass or scold tardy shepherds, doubles as the emergency broadcast system. No electricity, no megaphones, just iron, echo, and fear. As soon as the first clang hits the morning mist, people start moving. Not casually, not helpfully, but chaotically, in every direction. Some are racing toward the well, others toward the fire, and at least 3 are running in tiny circles holding bread dough they didn't want to abandon. You fall into step with them, bucket in hand, because that's the system, bucket chains. Medieval firefighting boiled down to passing containers of water down a human conga line of sweat, panic, and possibly one guy who's already drunk. The well is deep. Of course it is. Because water that's actually convenient would be too easy. So one person lowers a bucket while 5 others wait, nervously tapping their feet and debating whether it's faster to pray for rain. Once it's filled, the water gets passed up the chain, hand to hand, splash by splash, all the way to whoever has the least enviable job, throwing it on the flames. That person never gets the glory. They get soaked. They get scorched. And they get about 0.5 seconds of effectiveness before the fire snarls back and licks up another beam of the roof. Still, this human fire pipeline works, sort of. It's better than nothing, which is the standard medieval benchmark. villagers quickly learned that stopping a fire meant outpacing it. A single spark in summer could become a village-wide apocalypse before the priest could even fumble his way into a fire-themed sermon. Time wasn't a luxury. It was a burning rope with the flames chasing you down. Historians still debate whether these bucket brigades were pre-organized or just improvised chaos. Some towns kept community buckets by the well, others relied on every household to grab their own, often leaky, container. A few larger towns even had rudimentary protocols. If bell rang 3 times, fire. 5 times, invasion. 7 times, someone dropped the bell. You join the line, water sloshing into your shoes, back sore from hunching. The line shifts constantly. People rotate positions based on energy levels, seniority, or proximity to the next available curse word. And children? Oh, they're in on it too, mostly being yelled at, occasionally passing buckets, and often trying to sneak a peek at the fire like it's a traveling circus act. In some places, gongs or horns replaced bells. But bells were ideal because they lived up high, carried far, and didn't require breath support. They were also loud enough to wake the dead, or at least the village drunk, who might accidentally help for 5 minutes before passing out near the turnips. The system, for all its primitive design, created community. Fire didn't just threaten your home, it threatened your neighbor's cows, the church records, the village oven, and every scrap of effort your ancestors had built. So people helped each other. Even if you hated the tailor's loud singing or the miller's suspicious bread pricing, you passed that bucket. Because fire didn't care who was annoying, it burned everyone the same. Occasionally, the bell wouldn't even need to ring. If the wind shifted wrong or a child shouted, "Smoke," convincingly enough, people just dropped what they were doing and sprinted. There were false alarms, of course. Someone once rang the bell because they saw steam from soup. That person still hears jokes about it every Lent. There were village laws, too. Some towns had ordinances requiring every able-bodied adult to help fight fires. Refused to join the bucket line? You could be fined, shamed, or even banned from borrowing the village wheelbarrow, a fate worse than bread without butter. And yes, the village had a designated shamer. Usually a man with a loud voice and a surprising knowledge of everyone's embarrassing secrets. But sometimes the fire couldn't be stopped. That's when the bucket chain dissolved into rescue operations. Pull the old lady out of the loft. Get the cow out of the barn. Find the priest's collection of precious relics that may or may not include a suspicious number of fancy shoes. Priorities shifted. The bell kept ringing, now tolling more for loss than action. Quirky detail: in some places, villagers believed that ringing the bell also scared the fire away. As if flame itself had ears and a phobia of clanging. Sound silly? Well, it wasn't any less effective than trying to reason with a house engulfed in orange. And remember, these were the good fires. The ones that happened when people were awake, alert, and it wasn't raining sideways. Night fires were far worse. That bell would ring out into pitch black, and everyone had to scramble barefoot in mud and panic, groping in the dark for buckets, ladders, and their own sense of direction. The aftermath? You'd find burned beams, scorched ground, and someone crying over a lost butter churn. But there would also be relief. That the fire stopped. That the bell rang in time. That your house might still be standing, or at least, your neighbor's outhouse didn't fall into yours. Small mercies. So yes, medieval firefighting was more about unity and chaos than precision or technology. The bell was the alarm, the command, and the rallying cry all in one. And the bucket line? It was clumsy, wet, inefficient, and kind of heroic in its own muddy way. It's not over. The fire's out, or at least down to a sulking hiss, but the damage is very much done. You're standing ankle deep in muddy soot, holding a charred bucket with a bottom that gave up halfway through the effort. Around you, villagers assess the wreckage with the kind of stoic horror reserved for floods, famines, and realizing someone forgot to save the ale barrel. You glance at the homes, or what's left of them. Wattle and daub walls crumble like sad cake. Support beams lie scattered, smoking slightly, and above it all? Roofs, well, ex-roofs. Thatched bundles of kindling that turned houses into bonfires in minutes. They're gone now, and with them, the illusion that this village was anything close to fireproof. Here's the thing about medieval construction, it wasn't designed with fire safety in mind. Not even a little. Villagers built with what they had: wood, straw, mud, and good intentions. A lot of timber. A lot of thatch. Almost no stone unless you were the local lord, a monk with connections, or very lucky. Timber beams supported timber walls. Interiors were paneled with, you guessed it, more timber. Doors, beds, tables, ceilings, all the exact material you'd avoid if you were trying to reduce flammability. There were no fire retardants, no treated lumber, and certainly no one saying, hey, maybe don't store dry hay next to the oven. And then there were the tools. You'd think fighting fire would demand metal, muscle, and innovation. Nope. Wooden ladders, wooden poles, wooden rakes, basically, more things that the fire looked at and said, oh, dessert. Some villagers used shovels to throw dirt onto flames, but even those were often wood-handled, and if the fire was ambitious, it ate those too. What about axes? Sure. If you had one. But good luck finding a sharp, reliable blade when most tools were passed down through 3 generations and had seen more farm chores than a weary plough horse. The village blacksmith might help, if he wasn't too busy dousing his own forge or angrily kicking barrels. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers truly understood how dangerous their building methods were. Some think they did, but had no choice. Timber was cheap and everywhere. Stone required quarries, money, and hauling power. Brick needed kilns and patience. And medieval villagers were short on all 3. Others argue that people were simply used to fire. They'd seen it, lived through it, rebuilt from it. The risk was accepted like rainy days and the occasional plague. You watch as a young couple prods their house's remains with a stick, as if trying to coax it into UN burning itself. The roof collapsed inward. Inside, their cooking pot is buried under half the wall. Miraculously, the family goat has survived, now chewing serenely on someone's curtain. Priorities shift fast during fire recovery. Odd detail, people actually stored firewood inside their homes. Right next to the hearth. Convenience, they said. Cozy, they claimed. A raging fire hazard, they did not acknowledge. The medieval attitude toward fire prevention was less safety first and more, well, that's probably fine. And the buildings weren't the only problem. Clothing didn't help either. Wool is at least semi-resistant, but linen? Dry, flowy, and highly flammable. Especially on children who never stop moving and adults who never stop getting close to candles. Aprons caught sparks. Cloaks trailed through embers. Beards, mustaches, and those with little monk bangs? Also at risk. Worse still, many homes had animals indoors. Chickens, pigs, dogs, even cows in the colder months. Why? Because warmth and thieves. But that meant more movement, more panic, more flammable things with legs running around once the fire started. Try organizing a bucket brigade when a cow has decided it lives in the church now. And here's a grimly quirky twist: sometimes fire was the tool. Want to remove a derelict building? Torch it. Need to clear land? Burn the brush. It was quick, effective, and wildly dangerous, especially when the wind had opinions. Whole villages were accidentally scorched by controlled burns that went rogue faster than a drunk jester. But still, people coped. After a fire, they rebuilt. Often using the same materials, in the same place, with the same design. Because that's what they knew. You didn't innovate after a disaster, you survived. You tied bundles of thatch, smeared fresh mud between the timbers, and said a little prayer that the next fire would be someone else's problem. There were exceptions. Monasteries and wealthier households occasionally used stone for walls or tile for roofs. These homes fared better in fires, but they were rare, and often isolated from the rest of the village. If the Lord's manor survived, it didn't help your house. Unless he offered aid. Which he might. Or not. Depending on mood, generosity, and whether he liked your family. Some towns attempted fire zoning of a sort. They'd space out important buildings, or require thatchers to leave gaps between roofs. But in cramped villages, space was a luxury. Homes were often built cheek to cheek, with shared walls and communal ovens. When one house went up, the neighbors followed, like a very sad conga line. So, you look around. The fire's gone. The tools splintered. The home's ruined. And yet, someone's already sweeping ashes from a doorstep that no longer exists. Someone else is hammering a new doorframe into a wall of soot. And you? You're wondering if it's too soon to build again. It's not. Because that's what people did. They built, they burned, and they built again. Same tools. Same homes. Same risks. Because medieval resilience wasn't flashy. It was stubborn, smoky, and made out of wood. You haven't slept. No one really does after a fire. You lie there in a smoky haze, blankets damp from well water and nerves, ears twitching at every creak in the rafters. Because even if your home didn't burn, the fear lingers. Fires, especially night ones, are sneaky beasts, quiet, choking, and brutally fast. You can't smell them coming. Not in time. And by the time you feel the heat, it's usually too late. So you lie half awake, one eye open, wondering if your chimney's plotting revenge. Welcome to medieval nighttime fire anxiety, a common affliction, never diagnosed, always justified. Every village had a hearth. It was the beating, burning heart of the home. It cooked your meals, warmed your toes, smoked your meat, and maybe dried your laundry if you lived dangerously. But it was also a nightly gamble. You either let the fire go out, meaning you'd spend half the next day coaxing it back to life, or you tried to keep it smoldering quietly while you slept. Banking the fire, they called it. You'd cover it in ash or rake the coals to one side, hoping it stayed alive without becoming too alive. A delicate balance between warmth and arson. Historians still argue whether this was effective or just wishful thinking with extra steps. And let's not forget the houses. No insulation. No fireproofing. Just a lot of dry wood and drafts. Some villagers kept embers in special pots, covered in ashes, placed near beds to keep warm. Which sounds charming, until you realize you're sharing a straw mattress with a mini volcano. Many medieval fires started at night. Why? Because that's when people let their guard down. You're tired. It's dark. The baby's crying. The wind howls like a banshee with dental problems. You toss a log on the fire and hope it doesn't leap out in protest. You hear it more than see it, the creak of the chimney. That's another source of insomnia. Chimneys, if you even had one, weren't built to last. Many medieval cottages didn't have proper chimneys at all. Just a hole in the roof where the smoke escaped, along with all your warmth and any flying rodents that got confused. But the more sophisticated homes had stone or clay chimneys, often narrow, often cracked, and often full of soot. Without regular cleaning, which wasn't exactly a hot hobby, chimneys built up residue that could catch fire itself. That's right. Your smoke exit could become a flaming candle of doom. Night fires were also deadlier because of human nature. You sleep hard when you're exhausted from carrying water buckets all day. And let's face it, smoke isn't loud. It doesn't crash or yell. It just creeps in, fills your lungs, and turns dreams into dizzy confusion. Some villagers never made it out. The lucky ones woke up coughing. The luckier ones had a dog, a loud child, or a neighbor with very aggressive knocking. There were attempts at night watches. Some villages rotated the task, assigning a family or individual to keep an eye on things after dark. Not a glamorous gig. Cold, lonely, and only noticed when something didn't go wrong. But when it worked, it saved lives. You stayed up, listened for crackles, sniffed the wind, and tried not to fall asleep sitting upright. Quirky fact? Some homes used iron or stone fireboxes to contain embers overnight. They looked like tiny ovens or portable braziers and were often buried slightly in the floor. Handy, sure. But they also cracked with age, leaked smoke, and occasionally exploded if someone tossed in a damp log. Because in the Middle Ages, convenience always came with a side of danger. There was also the sleeping loft problem. Many cottages had upper sleeping areas above the main room, right under the roof. Cozy, warm, and directly in the path of rising heat and smoke. Fires that started below turned those lofts into traps. You either woke up and jumped, or didn't wake up at all. And those tiny wooden ladders? They lit up faster than festival torches. Children were the most at risk. Small, sleepy, and often tucked in tight to stay warm, they couldn't outrun a fire. That's why families slept close, sometimes in the same bed. Not just for warmth, but so someone would notice if the walls started glowing ominously. It's said that some villagers developed a kind of sixth sense, waking the moment the room felt wrong. You can believe it. You're feeling it now, lying there, blanket pulled to your chin, eyes darting to the hearth every few seconds. Outside, the wind moans. Thatched roofs rustle like dry grass. A dog barks once, then falls silent. And you listen, hard, for any sound that might mean something's catching. It's a nightly ritual. A mix of dread and gratitude. You survived another day. The fire didn't win tonight. But the truth is, every villager lived with this fear. It became background noise, like muddy feet or creaky doors. You accepted that your home was temporary. That one bad ember, one gust of wind, one forgotten spark could change everything. So you slept with one eye open. Not because you were brave, but because you had to. Because no one was coming with hoses and sirens. Because fire was your servant and your master. And because in the medieval world, a quiet night was something you earned, not something you expected. Dawn breaks, and you squint at the smouldering ruin where your neighbor's cottage used to be. There's no insurance adjuster pulling up in a horse-drawn cart. No claims department. No reassuring clipboard wielder offering hot tea and a pat on the back. There's just the smell of ash, the crunch of scorched wood underfoot, and the realization that everything that burned is just gone. No refunds. No coverage. Just loss. In the medieval world, there was no such thing as fire insurance. If your house burned down, you rebuilt it yourself, or you didn't. You relied on the mercy of your neighbors, the generosity of your Lord, or the resilience of your own hands. And if you had none of those, you slept in the open, thanked the sky when it didn't rain, and prayed your next home wouldn't light up like a torch. Just luck wasn't just a figure of speech. It was policy. You might be thinking, but what about guilds? Didn't they help? Well, yes and no. Some urban trade guilds did have emergency funds, a sort of medieval GoFundMe for members who lost property to fire, flood, or theft. But this was mostly in towns and cities, and mostly for those with connections. If you were a peasant or a tenant farmer out in the sticks, your guild was more likely to be the other exhausted, soot-covered folks handing you a bucket. Even in cities, insurance as we understand it didn't really exist until the late 1600s, post-Great Fire of London. That disaster shook people hard enough to invent financial safety nets. Before that, fires were just part of life. Like blisters, taxes, and that one goose that kept attacking children. So what happened when a house burned? First came the shock. Then the rescue mission, pulling out anything not fully incinerated. Maybe a cooking pot. Maybe a lucky wooden spoon that somehow didn't ignite. You'd see people picking through rubble like archaeologists of their own lives. Every charred object got held up, examined, and either sighed over or set aside with grim resolve. Then came the help, or lack thereof. In some cases, villagers would band together, pooling resources, extra thatch, timber, labor. They'd rebuild one house at a time, often in the same spot, because where else would you go? The village layout wasn't flexible. It followed the land, the church, and sheer habit. If your house burned, you didn't look for a better location. You just cleared the ashes and started anew. Again. But not everyone helped. Fires could uncover grudges. Maybe you owed someone a pig. Maybe you insulted someone's stew. Or maybe you just weren't liked. Medieval villages were tight-knit and petty. Generosity wasn't guaranteed. That neighbor who always claimed your goat wandered into their garden? Yeah, they might forget to offer help. Or worse, gossip that you started the fire on purpose. Fires had a way of uncovering more than just scorched beams. And speaking of that, accidental arson was a real fear. A tipped candle. A drunken tumble into the hearth. A lazy chimney sweep. Accidents happened, but intent? That was harder to prove. If people thought you'd been careless, or worse, malicious, you could find yourself shunned, fined, or even accused of something darker. Especially if the fire spread and took out more than your own walls. Because without insurance, the stakes were personal. If your fire ruined my home, we weren't just unlucky neighbors, we were enemies. And since there were no payouts, no restitution beyond what your own two hands could offer, justice was often informal and occasionally delivered with a pitchfork. Curious twist, in some places, communities developed informal fire taxes. Not in the official royal sense, but in the "we saw you didn't help, so now we won't help you" social enforcement kind of way. You didn't contribute buckets or timber? Good luck when your oven sets your wall alight. Mutual aid was survival, and neglecting it came with consequences. Lords, on the other hand, were wild cards. Some were benevolent, offering materials or waiving rent after a fire. Others? Not so much. Your cottage burned? That's unfortunate. Rent's still due next week. That pig won't feed itself. The aristocracy had their own problems, mostly involving wars, marriages, and which robe looked best with their mood swings. The church occasionally helped, especially if your tithes were consistent and your attendance unbroken. Priests might rally parishioners to help rebuild, or at least guilt them into it. Fires were often framed as divine punishment, but rebuilding? That was a test of piety. You couldn't just let your neighbor suffer. Not openly, anyway. And then there were the fires that broke the village spirit. If more than a few homes burned, or worse, if key structures like the mill, the bakery, or the alehouse went up in flames, people sometimes left. Not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't stay. Too much was lost. Too few resources remained. And starting over somewhere else, while dangerous, was better than freezing in ruins. Some families did rebuild stronger. Occasionally you'd see someone swap out thatch for wooden shingles, or reinforce a wall with stone if they had the means. But that was rare. Most simply recreated what they had before, because it was faster, easier, and all they knew. And as they did, they whispered stories. This beam came from the old house. That pot survived 2 fires. That goat? Still alive. The memory of the fire wove itself into the fabric of the village, not just as fear, but as folklore. The year of the big burn, they'd call it. Children would ask questions. Elders would nod gravely. And life would go on. But insurance? It was just luck. If your house burned and no one helped, you didn't sue, you suffered. If they did help, you repaid them in labor, goods, or stories retold beside the hearth. Ones you watched a little more carefully now. Always. It's a chilly evening, and you're hunched by the hearth, coaxing the fire to life with a bundle of twigs and the kind of patience normally reserved for grandmothers and saints. You squint up at the chimney, or what passes for one, a sooty hole ringed in cracked clay, maybe reinforced with a few stones, maybe not. Smoke bellows sideways for a second before reluctantly drifting upward. That's the good outcome. The bad? It swirls around the room like a confused ghost and settles directly into your lungs. Welcome to the medieval chimney, a marvel of engineering in the same way that a slingshot is a modern missile system. You're lucky to have one at all. Many villagers just let the smoke drift out through a hole in the roof, hoping the wind was cooperative and that the rain didn't come in like an uninvited cousin. And even when you did have a chimney, it was often more decorative suggestion than functional escape route. Some were just hollow tree trunks. Others were made of wattle and daub like the rest of the house, which meant they were, let's say, flame enhanced. You burned a fire under a flammable tunnel and hoped your roof didn't catch feelings. Stone chimneys were better, but expensive, heavy, and usually reserved for manor houses or church kitchens. If you were a regular villager, you had to make do. And make do meant everything from jamming a pot into the hole to catch soot, to praying the birds nesting in the flue didn't drop something unfortunate mid-cooking. Here's the real kicker: chimney fires were common. All that smoke left behind soot and creosote, a flammable residue that lined the inside like it was prepping for a reenactment of Dante's Inferno. One spark, and poof, your chimney became a medieval flamethrower. There were no chimney sweeps, no rotating brushes. Cleaning usually involved poking at the soot with a stick or shouting up the flue and hoping for divine intervention. Historians still argue whether villagers truly understood the danger chimneys posed, or just chalked them up to the fires in a mood again. Some even believed a fire roaring back down the chimney was a sign of bad luck, or worse, witches. Yes, witches. Because when something inexplicable and terrifying happened, it was easier to blame an old woman with a crow than admit your building techniques were sketchy at best. And now, we need to talk about how you lit that fire. Fire starting in the Middle Ages wasn't just flick with a lighter. It was a process. Flint and steel, sparks onto char cloth or dried fungus, maybe a bit of kindling, some straw. It took time, skill, and a willingness to be patient while your entire village stared at you, hungry and cold. Sometimes, you didn't even start a new fire, you borrowed one. Villagers would carry embers in clay pots from house to house, keeping the communal flame alive. It sounds quaint until you realize you're walking with a mini inferno cradled in fragile pottery. One stumble, and you've got a new fire in a very wrong place. Kitchen fires were especially notorious. Baking bread meant heating ovens, sometimes outdoor, sometimes built into the side of the house. Those ovens could crack, leak, or overheat. A distracted baker, or one too ambitious with kindling, might turn lunch into a 5-building inferno. And if you thought indoor cooking was safer, think again. Many hearths had wide open flames, poor ventilation, and a fondness for flaring up the second you turned your back. There's one account from a 14th century hamlet where a fire started during morning mass because someone left the stew pot too close to the coals. By the time they got back, the kitchen was gone, the neighbor's barn was toast, and the priest had to sermonize over smoldering potatoes. True story? Maybe. Plausible? Absolutely. Quirky fact: some villagers hung herbs and dried meats above the hearth. It saved space and helped preserve food. It also meant that, occasionally, a sausage caught fire and descended like a flaming meteor of regret. Imagine explaining that to your neighbors. And of course, there were no smoke alarms. No detectors. The only warning you got was your own nose, or your neighbor screaming from across the fence. Fires often started small and smoldered for hours before finally bursting into something noticeable. By then, it was usually too late. But despite all this, the hearth remained central. It was warmth, light, safety from wolves and winter. It was where families gathered, where bread rose and broth simmered. And because it was essential, people made peace with the risk. You couldn't live without fire, so you lived with the danger. Some tried to improve things. As the centuries wore on, wealthier villagers built clay or tile-lined chimneys. Towns introduced building regulations half-heartedly. And in a few progressive cities, there were even fines for poor chimney maintenance. Did that stop chimney fires? Not really. But it made everyone feel slightly better about the risk. So you sit there, poking your fire, listening to the wind test your chimney's loyalty. Smoke drifts lazily into the rafters. The fire crackles like it knows secrets. And somewhere above, a few stones rattle ominously. You cough, wipe your eyes, and shrug. Because in the medieval village, every chimney was a gamble. You just hoped the flames stayed in their place, the smoke found the sky, and the house didn't decide to take flight in ashes tonight. You're minding your own business, maybe humming a tune that's half hymn, half goat call, when the smell hits you. Burnt crust, scorched air, and the unmistakable scent of panic. You spin around and there it is, smoke curling from the corner of the cottage. Not from the roof this time, but from something far more personal. The kitchen. If medieval fires had a favorite place to begin their mischief, it was the kitchen. Or, to be more accurate, the open flame haphazardly designated as a cooking area. And among all the culinary culprits, the bread oven reigned supreme as the most likely to betray you. You'd think baking bread was safe, comforting, wholesome even. But no. In medieval times, it was a full contact sport. Most bread ovens were made of clay or stone, dome-shaped and tucked into a nook where airflow was something of a myth. You started the fire inside the oven, let it burn hot, scraped out the coals, and then quickly loaded in your dough. Simple, right? Well, no. Because that fire, it didn't always behave. Sometimes it reignited from hidden embers. Sometimes the dome cracked, spilling flames into the wall. And sometimes you got distracted, talking, praying, arguing over whose turn it was to milk the angry goat, and forgot to remove the fire at all. Which meant your loaf turned into a torch, your wall caught the mood, and suddenly, baking bread became a community event featuring buckets, shouts, and a lot of smoke. The placement of the oven didn't help either. Some homes had indoor ovens, which meant the fire was inside your already flammable house. Others had them attached to the outer wall, which only spread the risk sideways. A few lucky villages shared a communal oven, usually housed in a detached building made of marginally less combustible material. But even then, one enthusiastic baker could still set the entire structure aflame. And this wasn't just about ovens. Cooking in general was dangerous. Open hearths, boiling pots, frying pans filled with lard, all waiting to leap into chaos. One gust of wind through the wrong window, and your dinner became a pyrotechnic show. No one used lids. No one had aprons that weren't already kindling. And oil? If it caught fire, you didn't throw water on it, you ran, screamed, and hoped the stew had enough moisture to act as an extinguisher. Historians still debate how common kitchen fires were. Some records show entire neighborhoods reduced to ash by one unfortunate meal. Others suggest villagers were surprisingly adept at fire management. It probably depended on experience, luck, and whether someone decided to cook while drunk, which, to be fair, was not uncommon. A quirky side note: medieval cooks sometimes used bread to test oven heat. They toss in a small lump and watch how fast it blackened. If it smoked within seconds, the oven was too hot. If it baked nicely, all systems go. If it refused to brown, well, either the fire was out or the bread was possessed. This method was useful, but also meant you occasionally started a fire with your own edible thermometer. But nothing invited disaster like feast days. Special meals meant more food, more fire, and more distractions. Ovens running overtime. Hearths overloaded. Spits turning whole pigs while children darted too close, chasing each other with sticks and poor judgment. One festival in a tiny hamlet reportedly ended when the mayor's wife flambéed an entire side of lamb and most of the roof beams above it. The meal was saved. The dining room? Not so much. Even without flames, kitchens were full of hazards. Smoking meat near the rafters was common. It kept it dry and preserved. It also meant a fire in the hearth could ignite an entire pantry in minutes. And since most food storage was wood-based, barrels, crates, hooks made of twine, it didn't take long before a forgotten sausage turned into a flaming rope of chaos. And what about lighting? Oil lamps, candles, torches wedged into wall brackets, all open flames dancing merrily in a space already defined by heat and flammability. Drop one. Bump one. Forget to snuff it out. Boom. There goes the pantry, your eyebrows, and possibly the entire eastern wall. Still, the kitchen was essential. You couldn't not cook. Bread, porridge, broth, whatever passed for vegetables, all needed heat. And so villagers lived with the risk. Every meal was a gamble. Every spark a potential nightmare. Yet they kept cooking. Because eating raw barley is depressing, and no one wanted to be the one who ruined the communal stew again. Precautions existed, of course. Some folks kept buckets of sand nearby, ready to dump onto a flame. Others raked coals into metal basins to avoid flare-ups. And a few enterprising types placed flat stones around the hearth as a primitive firebreak. Did it help? Sometimes. Did it stop people from wearing wool cloaks near flames? Never. So you watch the kitchen smolder, neighbors now flinging wet cloths over the remaining embers. Someone's poking the oven with a stick, as if threatening it into obedience. The bread, now charred beyond recognition, sits like a guilty relic on a burnt plank. And you? You breathe the smoke, pat your singed tunic, and remind yourself, next time, maybe just eat cold cheese. The oven won't mind, and neither will the roof. You're catching your breath, still coughing a little from last night's oven incident, when someone in the village square starts ringing a handheld bell, not the big one in the tower, but the smaller one the herbalist uses when she's selling her miracle poultice, which is really just mashed mint. This time, though, she's not selling. She's praying. Loudly. And not just any prayer, it's to Saint Florian, patron of fire prevention and the unofficial medieval mascot for "Please, not again." Yes, before water pressure and 911 existed, villagers had saints and superstitions. Lots of both. When fire struck, the first instinct was panic. The second? Prayer. Villagers didn't just scream and run, they screamed, ran, and begged the divine to interfere. Saint Florian, in particular, was the go-to for fires. A Roman soldier turned martyr, he was said to have extinguished a blaze with a single bucket of water. Which, if true, is both miraculous and deeply annoying to everyone currently passing their 10th bucket in a human fire chain. So naturally, his image popped up in homes, churches, and anywhere remotely flammable. Some villagers carved tiny effigies of him and placed them near the hearth. Others sewed his symbol, a pail of water, into clothing or hung it above their ovens. Did it work? Who knows? But it made people feel better, and sometimes that's enough. But Florian wasn't alone. Other saints got involved, depending on regional preferences and local legend. Saint Barbara, for example, was occasionally invoked to protect against sudden death by fire, especially after a thunderstorm set fire to a bell tower in 1289 and the story traveled faster than the flames. Historians still argue whether these invocations were sincere protection or medieval version of spiritual insurance. Either way, the saints were busy. And if the saints didn't pick up the call, villagers turned to other methods. Amulets, charms, symbols scrawled in ash above doorways. It wasn't unusual to see crosses etched into beams or chalked onto hearthstones. Not just for piety, but for protection. Fire, after all, wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. Something wild, unpredictable, maybe even demonic. People believed that curses could cause fires. That envious neighbors, or worse, witches, could call down flames with a muttered spell and a handful of herbs. This belief made fire prevention a bit theatrical. You might see someone sprinkle salt around their house perimeter, or hang bundles of protective herbs like sage, rosemary, or, curiously, fennel, which was believed to keep hot mischief at bay. Didn't matter if it worked. If the house didn't burn, people credited the fennel. If it did, well, maybe you needed more fennel. Even smoke itself was believed to carry omens. If it rose straight, your fire was happy. If it curled and twisted, a warning. If it refused to leave the house and clung low to the floor, a sign that you should stop cooking and start confessing. That's not science, that's fear-based ventilation diagnostics. Then there were the rituals. Some villages had fire festivals where people danced around, controlled bonfires to honor the summer solstice or cleanse the community of evil. These events were often seen as protective, the logic being, if we give fire a party, maybe it won't crash through our roof next week. Quirky but real, in parts of the British Isles, villagers performed a fire charm ceremony called Need Fire during disease outbreaks or after devastating house fires. They extinguished all household fires and relit them from a new, sacred spark created by friction, no existing flame allowed. It was seen as a reset, a way to purify and protect. Whether it worked is debatable. Whether it was atmospheric and anxiety-inducing? Absolutely. And let's not forget the bells. Yes, again with the bells. In some villages, bells were rung not just to sound the alarm but to drive the fire away. Loud, constant clanging was believed to confuse or scare off evil spirits, because clearly a demonic inferno would think twice if it heard a clapper going full tilt in the church tower. Of course, not all beliefs were helpful. Fires sometimes led to scapegoating. That neighbor with the herbal knowledge? That woman who lived alone and always had dry firewood? Suspect. Fire was as much a trigger for superstition as it was a source of heat. And while most villagers rallied together after a blaze, some whispered. Blame smoldered right alongside the ruins. Yet through all the fear, rituals, and relics, there was a strange kind of comfort. When you're powerless against flame, it helps to believe in something. Saints. Charms. The protective power of rosemary hanging over your door. These weren't just quaint traditions. They were hope wrapped in ritual. A way to stand against chaos with a handful of dried herbs and a whispered plea. So you look around your kitchen. You've got Saint Florian carved into the wall beam. You've got a bundle of fennel hanging above the hearth. And just in case, a salt line near the threshold. Your neighbor thinks it's silly. You think it's sensible. The fire hasn't come back. Yet. The smoke has cleared, mostly, and you're sweeping soot from your doorstep with a broom that's more hope than bristle when you hear a metallic clanging. It's not the church bell this time. It's louder. Sharper. Coming from the forge at the edge of the village. That's right, the blacksmith's awake. And for once, everyone's happy to hear it. See, when fire hits, you don't immediately think of the blacksmith. He's usually the one banging iron, muttering about horseshoes, and yelling at his apprentice to stop feeding ale to the tongs. But in a village with no fire department, no hoses, and no backup plan, the blacksmith becomes an unlikely hero. Why? Because he's got something no one else does: tools, strength, and zero fear of heat. The village smithy is a world unto itself. The air smells like charcoal and iron. The walls are blackened with years of smoke. It's always hot, so hot that most fires seem polite by comparison. And the blacksmith lives in that heat. Day in, day out, hammering metal with arms like tree trunks and a scowl that could melt steel. So when a real fire breaks out, guess who's not panicking? He grabs his iron poker, a tool the length of a spear and 3 times as heavy, and charges toward the blaze like he's going to duel it. Where others flinch from the flames, he leans in, swinging iron hooks to tear burning thatch from roofs, smashing down collapsing walls before they can spread embers, shouting instructions in a voice that could wake the dead and possibly offend a bishop. Villagers follow him because they trust him. And because he once wrestled a goat away from a flaming haystack with nothing but a water-soaked apron. True story, according to local legend. Whether that goat ever recovered emotionally is still up for debate. Blacksmiths weren't trained firefighters, but they were close. They understood how heat moved. They knew how to contain it. And, more importantly, they weren't squeamish about smoke or sparks. Their forges were literal furnaces, and their lungs were used to breathing in everything but fresh air. One scholar even suggested that medieval blacksmiths may have had the highest tolerance for smoke inhalation in the village, not exactly a badge of honor, but certainly useful in an emergency. And let's not overlook their gear. Iron tongs, fire hooks, buckets forged from metal rather than leaky wood. When they fought fire, they brought hardware to the party. Some even had basic helmets, though these were more repurposed cooking pot than engineered protection. Still, better than nothing. Historians still argue whether blacksmiths were officially designated fire responders or just naturally fell into the role because everyone else was busy yelling. But plenty of old village records show blacksmiths being thanked, sometimes with extra grain, sometimes with a goat, once even with a ceremonial loaf of bread shaped like a flame. Yes, that's real. A carb-based trophy for not letting the alehouse burn down. And quirky fact, some smiths made special fire rakes, long-handled tools with claws at the end, used specifically for dragging burning material away from structures. They weren't standard issue. Each was handmade, often heavy, and could double as a weapon if things got out of control. Because in the Middle Ages, every tool had at least two jobs, the intended use, and, in case of fire or invasion. The blacksmith's role didn't end once the flames were gone. Oh no. That's when the real work began. Reforging broken hinges, repairing scorched tools, fashioning new firehooks from whatever scrap could be salvaged. Sometimes, he even made cooking tripods for families who'd lost their hearths. Not because he was sentimental, but because he hated seeing people cook directly on rocks like animals. His words, not mine. There's even a folktale in some regions that blacksmiths were fireproof. Not true, obviously, but the myth persisted. Likely because villagers watched them walk through smoke with sweat glistening and eyes squinting, looking like minor gods, or very annoyed uncles. Some blacksmiths leaned into the legend. They'd paint fire symbols on their forged doors, wear red tunics during feast days, or tell exaggerated stories of single-handedly beating back a flame with a sword so hot it hissed in the rain. Were they lying? Probably. Did anyone care? Not really. A little flair never hurt. Still, not all blacksmiths were helpful. Some stayed in their forges, muttering about how fire wasn't their problem unless it melted something valuable. A few even charged for their help. You want me to swing this iron bar at your roof? That'll be 3 eggs and a haunch of lamb. Pragmatic? Yes. Noble? Less so. But again, this was the Middle Ages. Survival first. Morals second. So next time the bell rings and the smoke rises, don't just look to the church or the well. Look to the forge. The blacksmith may not smile, may not speak kindly, and may, in fact, smell like boiled leather and regret, but he'll show up. Hammer in hand. Apron sizzling. Ready to swing at fire like it owes him money. And you? You'll hand him a bucket, back away slowly, and try not to block the path of a man who once made horseshoes during a thunderstorm just to prove a point. You've walked this path dozens of times, but tonight, something feels different. You tilt your head upward toward the village's lone tower, 3 stories of stone, creaky stairs, and birds that refuse to leave. It's meant to be a firewatch post, or at least that's what the elders say. But let's be honest, the most vigilant thing up there right now is a pigeon who hates your hat. The idea was good. Build something tall. Put someone up there. Watch for smoke. Alert the villagers. Simple, right? In theory. The medieval watchtower, or sometimes just the church belfry doing double duty, was supposed to be the village's lookout. A place to spot trouble from afar. Invading armies, storm clouds, and yes, that telltale ribbon of smoke slithering up from a thatched roof. It gave a head start. A few precious minutes to ring the bell, rally the bucket chain, and start yelling before things turned crispy. But here's the catch, someone actually had to be in the tower. And that, more often than not, was the problem. There wasn't exactly a hiring process for watchmen. Sometimes it was a rotating duty, your turn this week, Thomas, which meant Thomas would fall asleep on the job by day 2. Other times it was assigned to someone elderly, injured, or otherwise considered not much good with buckets. Not ideal if the lookout had bad eyesight, worse hearing, and a fondness for afternoon naps. You climb the steps and duck through the hatch into the tower's top chamber. The view is breathtaking, hills rolling into distance, chimney smoke drifting peacefully, the sun glinting off the river. But the platform is small. The wind is merciless. And the only comfort is a stool that's clearly lost a leg battle some years ago. There's a rusted horn hanging from a hook, theoretically used to alert the village in case of fire. You pick it up. It smells like fear and dried soup. You give it a half-hearted toot. Nothing. Either your lungs aren't up for it, or the horn is more decoration than function. Which, honestly, is a running theme here. Historians still argue how effective these watchtowers really were. In cities with large stone towers and dedicated watch crews, sure, fires were spotted early, and sometimes even stopped. But in rural villages, you were lucky if the watcher noticed smoke before it was a full-on inferno. And even luckier if they decided to do something about it instead of assuming it was just the baker trying a new crusty technique. A quirky historical tidbit, some villages used trained children, yes, children, as part-time watchkeepers. Light, nimble, and surprisingly sharp-eyed, they were stationed in towers with a bell cord and a warning to not ring it unless something's really burning. You can imagine how well that worked. Once, a boy rang the bell because he thought a cloud looked suspicious. The village rushed to arms. The cloud was just a cloud. At night, towers were even less reliable. No lights, unless you counted a flickering torch, and visibility? Minimal. You couldn't see flames until they were close enough to warm your eyebrows. Plus, watch duties in the dark were deeply unpopular. Cold. Lonely. Spooky. Many watchmen simply didn't show up, or they lit a fire in the tower to stay warm, which kind of defeated the purpose. Still, the idea stuck around. Over time, some villages upgraded their towers, added weather vanes, larger bells, even primitive lantern signals. A red cloth during the day. A torch waved 3 times at night. Codes that only worked if someone was watching the watcher, and if they remembered what 3 torches meant. Sometimes it just meant the watchman was bored. Even with all these flaws, towers had their moments. Once in a while, someone spotted smoke early enough. They rang the bell. People responded. A barn was saved. A few goats were mildly singed but otherwise intact. And those rare wins became legend. Remember the fire of 73, someone would say. Old Mags saw it from the tower just in time. Never mind that Mags had been looking for her runaway cat and happened to glance the right direction. So you climb back down, feet aching from the stone steps, and you nod at the tower. It's not perfect. It's barely functional. But it's something. A chance. A symbol. It stands there year after year, battered by wind and pigeon waste, pretending to be the village's watchful eye. And in a world without fire brigades, hoses, or alarms, even that pretense is better than nothing. The fire's out, but the cleanup has just begun. And here's the uncomfortable truth: you're mostly on your own. There's no truck rolling up with a cleanup crew, no coordinated response with gloves and masks and cheerful volunteers. It's you, a scorched broom, and the quiet horror of picking through soot-covered memories that still faintly smell of disaster. The first order of business? Clearing the rubble. Burned beams, melted hinges, walls that gave up halfway through the blaze, all of it has to go. And here's the thing, it's heavy. Charred wood might look soft and crumbly, but it's deceptive. You try lifting a blackened support post, only to find it's just light enough to slip from your grasp and just heavy enough to crush your foot if you're careless. Luckily, or not, you're not alone. A few neighbors show up, each holding something vaguely useful: a spade, a dull axe, a shovel that's seen better centuries. There's no real system. No command. Just muttered observations, occasional suggestions yelled over the sound of collapsing soot, and a shared sense that something needs to be done before rain turns the wreckage into a swamp. This is the medieval version of emergency response. No uniforms. No badges. Just familiarity, mutual dependence, and the kind of quiet resignation that comes from living one harvest away from famine at all times. It starts with hauling. Whatever isn't nailed down, or burned too far into oblivion, gets moved. Beams are rolled away. Stone foundations are poked at with sticks and cautiously declared, probably still usable. There's no time for sentimentality. The wooden cradle? Gone. The barrel that used to hold flour? Full of ashes. Your neighbor picks up what used to be a chair, studies it, then tosses it onto the pile with a shrug. That's just how it goes. Ashes are everywhere. You taste them when you breathe, feel them settle in your hair, watch them mix with sweat until you look like a chimney sweep with performance anxiety. And you'll keep tasting them for days. Everything smells like burned meat and regret. What's salvageable? Very little. Maybe some iron tools, if they didn't warp. A cooking pot, scorched but still whole. A stone bread slab. One family finds a wooden comb, singed at the edges but still intact. They treat it like treasure. Not because it's valuable, but because it survived. Survivors matter, even when they're hair accessories. And yet, as the work drags on, a rhythm develops. Haul, sort, toss. Haul, sort, pause to yell when someone finds a smouldering log and hurls it into the ditch. You fall into this pattern because it's better than stopping. Better than standing still and realizing you have no roof, no walls, and no idea what tomorrow looks like. Here's a quirky fact: some villages had designated fire pits, not for cooking, but for burying the remains of burned homes. The idea was part sanitation, part superstition. Ash carried bad luck, they said. So it had to go deep into the earth. And into those pits went everything: broken tools, burned cloth, warped planks. A layer of history sealed beneath layers of soot. Occasionally, someone would suggest reusing materials. This door hinge isn't that bad. Sure, it's melted into a shape resembling a tortured squirrel, but give it a polish and maybe it'll open something again someday. Rebuilding from the wreckage wasn't just thrift, it was necessity. Historians still debate how quickly villages rebuilt after fires. Some say recovery was fast, timber was cut, daub was smeared, and within days, new walls rose. Others argue that rebuilding was slow and painful, often delayed by weather, lack of manpower, or sheer emotional exhaustion. The truth? Probably a little of both. The community helped where it could. If one family lost everything, others pitched in. Someone brought dried herbs for tea. Another offered an extra chicken. Someone else provided labor, even if their own roof was half thatch, half sky. You repaid favors not with money, but with effort, kindness, or promises to help when the next misfortune landed. And while there were no government handouts, there were occasional gestures of mercy. A landlord might waive a month's rent, not out of kindness, but because you couldn't squeeze rent from ashes. The priest might offer extra bread or a place to sleep inside the church's stone walls. Children, somehow, still played in the rubble, using scorched beams as balance beams, laughing in the middle of what still smoldered. It was a strange kind of healing. The last task of the day is the hardest. You're standing where the hearth used to be, now just a circle of stone and black dust. There's something symbolic about it. The heart of the house, burned out. You crouch, dig a little, and find a piece of charcoal shaped like the corner of a breadboard. You pocket it. Not useful. Not even pretty. But it feels important. As the sun dips low and the sky turns the color of old parchment, you and your neighbors sit on a half-burned bench and pass around a gourd of thin ale. No one speaks much. The fire is out. The cleanup is underway. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow you start building again. That's the medieval promise. You rebuild. You recover. You laugh too soon. You curse the thatch and promise to do it better. And maybe, just maybe, you actually will. The decision comes quietly, without ceremony or votes. Just a few nods around a smoky fire and someone muttering, "We'll need to dig a new well." Not because the old one burned, it's underground, after all, but because someone dropped half a beam into it while running with a bucket and now the water tastes like regret and old boots. So now it's time for something the medieval world was really good at, improvising infrastructure. After a fire, every piece of the village has to be rethought, if not rebuilt. And one of the first questions is always, where's the water coming from? In the absence of fire trucks and hydrants, water was the lifeline of fire response, and that lifeline needed constant maintenance. Wells were hand-dug, sometimes lined with stone, often not, and very prone to contamination. If a fire spread near the well or someone dumped ash too close, you could kiss clean water goodbye. And since bathing wasn't exactly a daily ritual, a bad well meant a very smelly recovery period. So digging new wells, or at least repairing the old ones, became a critical part of fire recovery. You watch as a few villagers haul ropes, shovels, and what looks like a suspiciously repurposed ale barrel toward the center of town. It's going to be a group effort. It always is. Then there's the question of layout. The burned area has become an opportunity. Maybe don't rebuild the thatcher's house directly next to the baker's oven this time. Maybe give the animal pens more space. Maybe move the communal grain store away from the tavern, so the next inebriated spark doesn't wipe out dinner for the month. Historians still debate how often medieval villages rethought their layouts after disasters. Some argue that most people just rebuilt as before, fast, familiar, and without imagination. Others point to charters and maps that show small shifts, wider lanes, fire breaks, a few brave attempts at urban planning. You can see both at play in your village now. One family is already staking out their old plot. Another's eyeing the hill, thinking maybe elevation will help next time. One quirky detail? Some towns had actual rules about where fires could be lit. In parts of Europe, public edicts forbade any open flame within a certain distance of thatch, hay, or barns. Enforcement was spotty. Sometimes it meant a fine. Sometimes a very disappointed priest sermonized about fire safety while pointedly glaring at the baker. And speaking of rules, after a fire, there were always new ones. No fires after sundown. No ovens left burning unattended. No using dry straw as wallpaper. Yes, that was a thing. These rules were usually shouted across the square rather than written down, but people remembered. Mostly. You look around and notice something else: tools. People are carrying hammers, saws, and chisels that haven't seen daylight since last harvest. The blacksmith's forge is already glowing again, and someone's got a fresh batch of nails cooling on a plank. Rebuilding isn't just about shelter, it's about infrastructure. Ladders get replaced first, since they double as fire tools. Then come new buckets, some borrowed from nearby villages. You even see someone weaving one from reeds and muttering, "This one won't leak." I swear at this time. No one believes him, but no one stops him either. There's a push to widen the lane between two rows of houses. Not because anyone measured it, but because 4 people and 2 goats tried to run through it during the fire and got stuck. Lessons learned. Sort of. Then comes the rebuilding of the communal oven. It's an important step, partly because people miss bread, but also because it brings the village together. The oven is rebuilt with more stone, less wood, and a careful eye on the wind direction. It might not prevent another fire, but it feels smarter. More secure. Progress by inches. You help lay the stones. The mud squishes between your fingers, gritty and cold. Someone hums a tune. A child drops a bucket and laughs. There's still a smell of ash in the air, but it's fading, being replaced by something newer, hope, or maybe just fresh clay. And as the new infrastructure rises, so do new roles. The boy who rang the bell too early last year, now officially in charge of watching the chimney smoke during baking days. The widow who used to sell herbs. She's managing the water schedule, keeping track of how much each household can draw from the well. Someone's even carving a wooden sign with a fire symbol and sticking it on the forge, a warning, or maybe just decoration. Little systems form. Who watches the oven on feast days? Who maintains the new fire rake? Who keeps the buckets by the door and not, as someone once did, full of chickens? These aren't official titles. No one wears badges. But it's a kind of fire management, medieval style, based on routine, respect, and the memory of what happens when you don't pay attention. So you stand in the middle of it all, mud on your boots, soot in your hair, and something oddly close to pride in your chest. The village is rebuilding not just homes, but defenses. Passive ones. Practical ones. Fire won't be stopped, not completely, but it might be slowed. Diverted. Survived. And that, in a world without fire trucks, is a monumental win. You wake to the sound of sawing. It's rhythmic, familiar, and surprisingly soothing, at least compared to the screams of panic and rooster-based false alarms you've endured lately. Rebuilding is in full swing, and everyone's hands are full. Yours included. But what are you rebuilding with? Let's talk about materials, because in the medieval world, your choice of construction wasn't just a matter of style. It was the difference between cozy family hearth and accidental bonfire. And unfortunately, most medieval villages didn't have the luxury of fire-resistant stone or fancy tiles. They had wood, lots of it, and mud, and straw. Basically, the Three Little Pigs starter kit, minus the pig with the good idea. First up, timber. Timber was everywhere, because it grew on trees, and trees were free if you didn't get caught cutting from the Lord's forest. Beams, rafters, walls, even furniture all came from local wood. Oak was strong but heavy. Pine was easier to work with but burned faster than gossip in a tavern. If your house caught fire, odds were good the flames traveled beam to beam like a squirrel with anger issues. Then there was wattle and daub. Wattle is just sticks, woven together like a loose basket, and daub is a magical medieval mixture of clay, dung, straw, and sheer desperation. Slathered over the wattle, it dried into a reasonably strong wall, until it got too dry, or too wet, or someone sneezed too hard near it. It was common, cheap, and surprisingly good at catching fire once it had aged into the consistency of dry toast. Thatched roofs. Oh, those were the pièce de résistance of flammable architecture. Bundles of dry straw, laid thickly for insulation, and fastened tightly to wooden beams. They looked quaint. They kept out the rain. And they turned houses into candles whenever a spark got bored. It's said that birds sometimes stole bits of burning twig to build nests, making rooftop fires almost a seasonal tradition. Historians still argue whether villagers understood just how fire-prone their materials were. Some say they knew but didn't care, they just built fast and cheap, accepted the risk, and hoped for the best. Others argue that people genuinely believed in the safety of what they used, since it was all they'd ever known. Maybe it was both. Maybe knowing something's dangerous isn't the same as having the means to avoid it. Quirky fact, in a few places, there were fire days, when villagers inspected each other's homes for risks, loose thatch, exposed beams near hearths, wooden chimneys. Yes, those existed. Of course, these inspections were informal and sometimes biased. You call this a fire hazard? My cousin's cottage lit itself twice last month, and he just moved the table. After a fire, people sometimes tried to upgrade. A few swapped out straw roofs for wooden shingles. Still flammable, but marginally less suicidal. Others added stones around hearths, or plastered daub walls with lime to reduce flammability. If you were really lucky and rich, you could build partially in stone. It didn't catch fire easily, but it was expensive, heavy, and required more tools than most villagers owned. You help carry a beam to a neighbor's rebuilding effort. It's freshly hewn, smells like pine sap, and already feels warmer than your current roof. He grins. "This one won't burn," he says. He's joking. Probably. You both know that fire doesn't play favorites. It'll lick its way up a shingle as gleefully as it devours straw. But it's comforting to pretend. What about insulation? That's the other catch. All thatch and daub provided some warmth, but stone walls were cold and drafty unless you had thick tapestries, and who had time to weave those? So most villagers kept using materials that kept them warm and also kept the local fire gods entertained. Fire safety took a back seat to not freezing in your own bed. And while we're talking quirks, some villagers hung fishnets across the ceiling rafters, supposedly to catch falling embers from the hearth. Or spiders. Or both. In practice, it just added one more flammable layer to an already ambitious inferno plan. Still, you notice a subtle shift this time. People are rebuilding a little smarter. Some are spacing buildings out more. Others are adding stone bases to wooden walls. Someone's even experimenting with a tiled hearth, using broken pottery as makeshift fire-resistant flooring. It looks awful. It might help. Either way, it's effort. And you? You're red-hatching your roof. Carefully. Slowly. Each bundle tied tighter, positioned just a little higher, angled away from the chimney hole. You mutter a prayer to Saint Florian and wedge a flat stone between the beam and the flue. Small steps. Small defenses. Because you know what's coming. Maybe not today. Maybe not this season. But at some point, something will burn again. That's the nature of medieval life. Fire is always waiting. The only question is whether you're ready. So you keep tying bundles, your hands rough with twine, your arms sore from lifting, and your eyes flicking to the hearth every few minutes. And above you, the sky darkens, clouds gathering in a way that says, rain first, fire later. One disaster at a time. It's market day, and the village is bustling in that loud, slightly disorganized way only small communities can manage. You dodge a runaway pig, sidestep a barrel of apples, and find yourself wedged between a man selling dubious cheese and a woman loudly swearing that her geese are trained to detect fires. You smile. You don't believe her, but you admire the hustle. Markets aren't just for trading vegetables and the occasional goat, they're where information flows faster than the river after spring melt. And today, everyone's talking about the fire. Not your fire, mercifully, but one in a nearby village. Burned half their main lane. Took out a barn, a bakery, and apparently the midwife's entire spice collection, which she's deeply salty about. But it's not just gossip. With every retelling of disaster comes a piece of practical advice. Don't store oil near the hearth. Line your chimney with salt, it wards off flame. The baker's wife swears by soaking thatch in brine. Are any of these tips true? Maybe. Probably not. But medieval villagers aren't picky. When fire is your enemy, every story is ammunition. This is how knowledge spreads. Not through books, most villagers can't read, but through conversation, shared experience, and a healthy dose of exaggerated storytelling. You hear someone describe a town that built its houses in a spiral to keep fire from jumping between roofs. Another claims a far-off hamlet only uses stone and sleeps in their ovens for safety. You roll your eyes, then immediately wonder if sleeping in an oven would actually work. There's a sort of folklore to fire prevention. One man insists that ringing a bell at midnight keeps sparks from traveling. A child solemnly tells you that her grandmother swears placing a frog on the windowsill deters fire spirits. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were protective superstitions or just fun distractions. Maybe both. In a world of uncertainty, a frog at the window can't hurt. But not all market chatter is fanciful. You overhear someone from the next valley talking about a town that now keeps a fire cart. It's a rickety wooden wheelbarrow with buckets, shovels, hooks, and wet blankets. Stored centrally. Everyone knows where it is. When fire breaks out, someone runs for the cart. It sounds organized, ambitious, revolutionary, even. You find yourself thinking about your own village. Could a fire cart work here? Maybe stash it near the well. Maybe add a bell or a flag. You mention it to a few others. Some nod thoughtfully. Others scoff. "We've never needed one," says a man whose roof has burned twice. You make a mental note to ignore him. Ideas like this spread slowly but surely. One town tries something new. It either helps or doesn't. The news trickles down through markets, festivals, traveling peddlers, and visiting clergy. Fire safety isn't written law, it's crowdsourced, patched together from experience and necessity. And a little drama, of course. Quirky fact, some traveling performers included fire safety skits in their acts. A clownish character would start a fake blaze, prompting a chaos of buckets and shouted advice. It was part comedy, part lesson. Kids laughed. Adults pretended not to, then muttered, "Might not be a bad idea, that bucket by the door." Fire education, medieval style. As you weave between stalls, you also notice tools for sale. Newer buckets, copper ones, if you can afford them. Stouter brooms. Someone's selling fire hooks, long poles with curved iron ends. Meant to pull down burning thatch or tear away collapsing beams. The smith grumbles they're overpriced. The merchant insists they're blessed. They both might be lying. Nearby, a woman's selling bundles of herbs labeled flame blocker. It's just rosemary and dried moss, but the packaging is compelling, a charm tied in red thread, a token of safety. You buy one. Not because you believe it'll work, but because it smells nice and superstition has better PR than reality. Then you come across a makeshift bulletin board, planks nailed to a tree, covered in parchment scraps. One catches your eye, a crude drawing of a house with smoke curling out of the chimney, and under it, the words, "Build smarter. Burn slower." Someone's trying to start a campaign. It's clumsy. It's hopeful. It makes you smile. Historians point out that communal gatherings like markets were the real engines of cultural transmission. Innovations weren't birthed in isolation, they spread through conversation. And fire prevention was no exception. You didn't just trade for cloth and beans. You traded ideas. What worked? What didn't? Who panicked? Who stayed calm? What kind of ladder holds best when your wall is crumbling? As the sun sets and the market winds down, you return home with a pouch of barley, a bundle of rosemary, a questionable fire hook, and the half-serious intention to start a fire cart discussion at next week's village meeting. You also keep glancing at the frog you didn't buy, wondering if maybe, just maybe, he would have helped. Your house is still standing. For now. And thanks to a day of eavesdropping and accidental education, it might stand a little longer. It's the middle of the night when you hear it, a crackle, sharp and sudden. You sit up, heart pounding, eyes straining in the dark. A moment later, the unmistakable scent of smoke curls into the room like a rude guest. This isn't a drill. This is it. Your body moves before your brain fully catches up. You grab the cloak by the door, nearly trip over the cat, and shout for anyone nearby. The fire has come again. But this time, something's different. It's not panic. Not exactly. It's urgency wrapped in something steadier, muscle memory, maybe. Because this isn't your first fire. And it's not your village's first either. You know what to do. The bell rings, thankfully not by the pigeon this time. Someone's pulling the rope at the watchtower with the determination of someone who's seen what happens when no one does. The sound is jarring, echoing through the sleeping village. Doors fling open. Shadows dart between homes. People yell names. Count heads. Grab buckets. The fire's at the edge of town this time, near the tanner's hut. You see orange flickering behind the trees, lighting up the sky like sunrise come too early. And here's where it all comes together. That bucket chain? It forms faster. The well hasn't dried up yet. Someone remembered to leave the rope tied and the pail ready. You join the chain, passing the water hand to hand. It splashes your legs. Soaks your boots. You don't care. The new fire rake, ugly, improvised, probably cursed, is already in someone's hands, pulling smouldering thatch away from an adjoining roof. The blacksmith is there, as expected, shirtless, furious, and wielding a shovel like it owes him money. He doesn't even blink when a beam crashes nearby. Someone else is shouting for the cart. The one you heard about at market. Your village didn't have one until last week. Now, here it is, rickety, uneven, but loaded with tools and soaked blankets. It creaks into view, pulled by a teenager with soot on her cheeks and the gleam of vindication in her eyes. Told you this would work, she mutters as she tosses a hooked pole to another villager. The fire is bad. But it's not as bad as last time. Because this time, the flames don't leap house to house. That empty space where the haystack used to be? Now a fire break. That stone wall someone grumbled about building? It holds, slowing the spread. Those sand buckets hanging by doorways? Used, refilled, used again. And people move like they've practiced. Because they have. Not formally. Not in drills. But in memory, in whispers, in all the stories passed around markets and campfires and after church gossip. Every "remember what happened to the millers" is a lesson. Every "don't store firewood under the eaves" is a prevention strategy. You're at the bucket line, shoulders aching, and someone hands you a cup of water, not to fight the fire, but to drink. You nod thanks, then splash the rest onto your face. It stings. It wakes you. And then you're back at it. Hours pass. The fire hisses and crackles, then dies down to smoke and embers. A barn is lost. Part of a shed. But the houses, intact. Scorched, but standing. People murmur in disbelief. Someone actually laughs, a wet, tired sound. And then, as always, the quiet settles. That eerie hush after the chaos. You sit on a rock, your hands blistered, your tunic blackened, and watch the smoke drift up into the morning sky. A rooster crows, late as ever. It feels like a joke. No one laughs. But someone claps you on the back and offers bread. You take it. Historians might look at moments like this and wonder, did medieval villagers have fire preparedness? They'll sift through records, charters, diagrams of settlements. They'll argue over terminology and intent. But you know the truth. You lived it. Preparedness wasn't always formal. It was built on necessity, on shared memory, on whispered advice and smudged charcoal drawings nailed to a board. It was the rake someone insisted on making, the buckets someone filled every day, just in case. It was resilience, dressed in soot and patched wool. Quirky detail, one elder insists on inspecting all homes again, personally. He's holding a goose feather and tapping on walls, declaring them smoke-tainted or sound. No one questions him. He helped save the mill. Let the man have his feather. By sunset, people are already talking about repairs. One boy wants to reinforce the barn with stone. Another suggests fireproof paint, made from lime and egg whites. Probably nonsense. Possibly brilliant. That's how innovation begins. You, meanwhile, finally rest. Back on your half-thatch bed, eyes sore, legs stiff, heart still echoing with the night's heat. The fire came again. And this time, you didn't lose everything. Not because of luck. Because you were ready. The fire's been out for days now, and the smell still clings to everything. Your cloak. Your boots. Even the soup tastes vaguely of ash. But life pushes forward. Rebuilding continues, chores resume, and now a new kind of conversation flickers through the village, one that's less about survival, more about planning. The question on everyone's soot-stained lips, how do we stop the next fire before it starts? Turns out, your village has decided to get proactive. It starts small. Someone carves a wooden sign to hang above the communal oven, never leave the fire alone. The lettering's a bit shaky, and someone's doodled a chicken underneath, but the message is clear. No more just stepping away while the stew simmers. If you're cooking, you're watching. Period. From there, the rules start snowballing. Every home must keep 2 full buckets of water near the hearth. One for cooking. One for emergencies. You'd be surprised how many folks argue about which bucket is which. One man insists on labeling his, with "not for soup" carved into the rim. His wife is not amused. Then comes the chimney check. Once a week, everyone's required to poke at their flue with a stick. If it comes out clean, you're good. If it comes out covered in soot and disappointment, it's time for a full scrape. Some households even appoint a chimney kid, usually the smallest child, who's either brave or gullible enough to crawl up and clear debris. Historians still argue whether this was an actual fire prevention method or just a medieval version of sibling hazing. Next, firewood rules. All logs must be stored outside, at least a goat's length from any structure. This unit of measurement is, of course, vague. Some goats are ambitious. But the idea is solid. No more stacks of tinder leaning lovingly against your front door. And let's not forget about candles. The priest decrees that no one is allowed to leave a candle burning unattended, especially during services. Apparently, last year's Christmas vigil ended with 3 scorched benches and 1 very confused owl. Now, every candle must be set in a clay holder, placed on a stone slab, and never left near curtains. Not that most villages have curtains, but it's the principle. There's also a new night watch rotation. Not for guarding against invaders, but for patrolling the village after dark to sniff out smoke and douse any suspicious embers. The volunteers are mostly teens who treat it like a game, racing each other from house to house, poking around like junior detectives. One proudly carries a bucket labeled Ember Destroyer. He wears a feathered cap. No one knows why. Quirky fact: one village elder insists that no one is allowed to burn angry wood, his term for resinous pine that sparks aggressively when tossed on the hearth. He swears it's cursed. You think he just dislikes the noise. Regardless, villagers start separating firewood into calm and angry piles. It's weird. It sort of works. And then, the grand finale, the village council gathers and declares an annual fire week. A whole week dedicated to fire safety education, demonstrations, and mildly competitive bucket passing relays. There's even talk of inviting someone from the next village over to give a talk on alternative roofing strategies. You snort at the idea. Then remember that your own roof just got patched with whatever was lying around. Maybe a few tips wouldn't hurt. You help organize the first fire week, mostly by accident. You mention it while passing the herb lady and suddenly you're the fire coordinator. Your tasks include inspecting water buckets, assigning firewatch patrols, and inventing a catchy slogan. You go with, "Don't let flames claim your frames." It's a stretch. It sticks. Children run through the square chanting it. Someone carves it into the well. Someone else starts selling charms with little fire symbols crossed out. They're just clay discs, painted red, but they sell faster than cabbages. Commerce, meet fear. And through all this, something subtle shifts. People stand a little straighter near their hearths. They watch the flames with a touch more suspicion. Buckets are refilled without reminders. Ladders are stored within reach. Even the chickens, usually oblivious to all but corn, seem vaguely alert. Historians might scoff at the idea of fire safety culture in a medieval village. But it's here. Not written in books, but etched in behavior. Reinforced through memory. Strengthened by experience. It's informal, inconsistent, sometimes absurd, but it works. One night, you sit by your own hearth, flame flickering low, water bucket gleaming in the corner, and you realize you feel safer. Not invincible. Not fireproof. But less alone. The village has your back. The bell still hangs in the tower. The fire cart creaks reassuringly in its shed. And outside, a teenager patrols with his Ember Destroyer, whistling off-key under the moonlight. Morning breaks with a screech from a rooster who clearly doesn't believe in sleeping in, followed by the dull clatter of wooden pails against the well. It's another quiet day, which in a medieval village usually means trouble's just taking a nap. But today, you hear something odd. Laughter. You step outside and there it is, a full-blown bucket relay in the square. Children running from one end to the other, trying to pass water from pail to pail without spilling it all. They're soaked. Screaming. One is wearing the fire hat from last week's Fire Week as a crown. Another is shouting "Embers beware" like he's auditioning for a play. It's adorable. And, somehow, deeply practical. See, in a village without firefighters, the best emergency response is community. And that means everyone, yes, everyone, pitches in when the flames start climbing. Kids, elders, goats with unfortunate proximity to buckets. There are no bystanders, just varying levels of helpfulness. Children, in particular, are uniquely placed in this equation. They're fast, they're everywhere, and they're surprisingly effective once they've been yelled at enough times not to trip while carrying water. During a fire, they fetch, run messages, refill buckets, and yes, occasionally get in the way. But when the flames are licking your doorpost, you don't argue about age, you hand out buckets. In fact, some villages trained kids in the basics. Not in a formal, here's your fire license kind of way, but through games. Bucket relays. Pretend hearth drills. Whoever kept the fake fire, a pile of red cloth and old sticks, from spreading, got a sweet roll. Whoever tripped and dropped the water got to explain it to the elder council, which was about as fun as falling into the well. You remember your own first fire roll, probably age 7, probably holding a sloshing cup of water while an adult yelled, "Run!" You did. You spilled it. The barn didn't burn down, but your pride sure did. Still, you learned. That's the point. Everyone learns. Adults, of course, handle the heavy lifting. They swing the rakes, knock down burning beams, haul barrels of water like overworked mules. But they also panic, yell, argue over who's in charge. Sometimes they make it worse. Historians still debate how effective the average medieval adult was during a fire. Some records show stunning bravery, villagers forming chains across frozen rivers to pass buckets. Others show chaos, someone trying to douse a grease fire with mead. Spoiler, it didn't help. But kids? They watch. They copy. They absorb every shout, every sprint, every desperate motion. And when the next fire comes, they're a little less afraid. A little more practiced. Quirky detail, in some places, kids had designated fire cries, specific phrases they were taught to shout when they spotted smoke. One common call was "Foresky," yelled while pointing at the rising plume. Another was simply "smoke," screamed repeatedly until adults noticed. Both were effective. Both were loud. You've definitely heard them at least once while someone was just burning stew. And what about elders? They're slower, less likely to run. But don't count them out. Many remember past fires like they happened yesterday. They know which way the wind tends to blow, which roof leaks, which walls are already half kindling. Some carry long poles and tap door frames for signs of hidden smoke. Others simply stand and shout orders until someone listens. They've earned that right. During your last fire, it was old Mags who grabbed a rake and cleared the path to the well before anyone else thought to. She didn't yell, didn't ask, just moved. And later, when someone thanked her, she said, "First fire was in '53. That one took my cat. I don't lose another." No one argued. So now, watching the kids run their makeshift drills, you realize something profound: every age has its role. Not always glamorous. Not always effective. But essential. The fire doesn't care how old you are. But it notices if you hesitate. This communal awareness spreads. One neighbor teaches the young ones how to fill a bucket without dropping the rope into the well. Another shows them how to tie a damp cloth over their mouths to breathe better in smoke. It's basic. It's brilliant. One boy builds a tiny ladder out of sticks. He says it's for practice. Someone laughs until he uses it to rescue a chick from a low roof gutter. The ladder stays. So does the story. Historians might look at this and call it informal pedagogy or pre-industrial community resilience. But in the moment, it's just life. One more way to keep the flames at bay. The sun sets. The bucket game winds down. Kids collapse into heaps of giggles and muddy feet. Someone brings out bread. Someone else lights a tiny fire, this one controlled, ringed with stone, watched carefully. The embers glow softly, casting flickering shadows across faces young and old. You sip from your cup and watch the flames. Not with fear. Not this time. But with a wary respect. You know what fire can do. You also know that when it comes back, and it will, you won't be alone. The air has that edge to it, the kind that makes your nose sting and your fingers ache before you even leave your bed. Winter's here, full blast, and with it comes a new kind of danger. Fire, yes, but now with a side of frostbite. The irony isn't lost on anyone. Cold as it is, the risk of fire doesn't go away. In fact, it doubles down. Every hearth in the village is burning hot and long, because no one wants to wake up with icicles in their eyebrows. People stack wood higher, burn longer, and push their luck further. Embers pile up. Sparks pop and dance out of overworked chimneys. And outside, everything's frozen. Which brings us to a chilling truth. When the fire starts now, the water might not come. The first time it happens, it's early morning. Someone yells smoke, and people stumble out of their homes, cloaks pulled tight, boots crunching on icy mud. The blaze is small, just a chimney flare-up at the edge of the village, but the bucket line forms automatically, trained into everyone by sheer repetition. And then comes the moment of horror. The well's frozen. The rope hits something solid. The bucket clunks uselessly. Someone swears. Someone else runs to another well, same result. All that preparedness, all that planning, and now the water's stuck in its own icy prison. Panic threatens. But then someone has the idea: snow. Crushed into buckets, dumped on flames, heaped around hot beams to keep them from spreading. It's clumsy. It's slow. But it works, barely. The fire's contained, though not without damage. And after, everyone gathers, steaming with sweat in the freezing air, stunned by how close it was. That's when the real scramble begins. From then on, every house keeps a snow bucket by the door. Filled nightly. Topped off by the kids who used to think fire duty was fun and games. They grumble, but they do it. You help shovel snow into barrels and set them near the hearth, not too close to melt, not too far to freeze. You cover wells with straw and cloth, hoping it'll keep the frost at bay. It helps. Sometimes. But winter firefighting is always a gamble. Your boots slip on ice while carrying a pail. Someone trips over a snowdrift and nearly soaks the fire instead of the flames. And the smoke? It hangs heavy in the cold, refusing to rise, curling low and choking, like it enjoys watching people suffer. Historians still argue how medieval villages adapted to winter fires. Some say communities just accepted higher risk during colder months. Others point to clever workarounds: heated well covers, stone cisterns insulated with animal hides, even warm stone sleds for hauling buckets. Few of these ideas were widespread. Most were invented locally, passed down with a nudge and a knowing look. Quirky fact: in some regions, villagers believed fire burned hotter in winter. Not because of temperature, but because they could see it better. The theory was that the flames stood out more against snow, which made them feel bigger. Scientific? Not remotely. But perception-shaped response. Fires felt more dangerous when surrounded by white. And then there's the smoke markers. In warmer months, smoke means trouble. But in winter, every chimney smokes. The real danger is no smoke at all, a sign that someone's hearth has gone out, possibly due to cold, illness, or worse. So villagers start watching for missing smoke, not rising plumes. It becomes part of the daily routine. Saw no smoke from old Bram's place. Go check on the weaver, nothing from her chimney since dawn. It saves lives. Fires don't just destroy homes, they also stop people from freezing. And in winter, the line between burning and surviving is razor thin. Of course, not every fire is an emergency. Some are just annoying. Like when someone tries to start a hearth too fast and sends smoke pouring into the room. You've learned to crack the shutters, wave a cloth, and mutter, "Next time, less kindling." The lesson stings more than the smoke. And yet, there's something oddly comforting about the routine of winter fire watching. The nightly check of embers. The slow scoop of snow into buckets. The hiss of cold water hitting hot stone. It's ritual. And in a season where everything else feels brittle and uncertain, rituals matter. One night, you find yourself watching your fire burn low, listening to the creak of wind against the shutters. You check the water barrel, half slush, half ice. You shift a few coals, add a log, and listen to it crackle. Safe. For now. Outside, a patrol passes, a boy and his older sister, boots crunching, cloaks flapping. He carries a bucket. She carries a stick with a glowing ember at the tip. A traveling hearth, ready to reignite any home gone dark. You nod as they pass. They nod back. Winter has changed the rules. But you're learning. It starts with whispers. A fire breaks out on a calm spring night, tearing through the edge of the village where homes nestle tightly together like sleepy hens in a coop. The wind is mild, the moon full, and the air carries the screams clearly. It's a nasty one, 2 homes gone, a third half charred, and several animals scattered and singed. The fire's out before dawn, but the smoke lingers in your throat, thick and sour. Then comes the question, how did it start? The baker swears it wasn't his oven. The tanner blames the lanterns from the feast. Someone mutters about a spilled oil lamp. But another voice, sharp, low, unmistakable, says, witchcraft. And just like that, the tone changes. You'd like to believe your village is beyond superstition. That after all the drills, all the rakes and relays and snow buckets, people would look to practical causes first. But fear has its own logic. And in a world where flame strikes without warning, it doesn't take much for suspicion to catch fire too. It starts subtly. A widow who lives alone and speaks to cats a bit too fondly suddenly finds herself shunned. Her chimneys watched more closely than others. Someone notes her roof never seems to catch, as if that's a crime. You see her at the well and she looks tired. Ash smudged. Her bucket's older than most, but she still feels it. Then someone else, a man with a limp and a habit of muttering to himself, has his chicken coop burned down mysteriously. He claims it was an accident. Others say he set it himself. Still others whisper that he knows curses. He insists it was foxes. No one believes him. Historians still argue whether witchcraft accusations were more common after fires. Some say fire was just another excuse in a long list of scapegoat strategies. Others believe the suddenness and destruction made it a uniquely fertile ground for blame. Fire didn't just destroy, it erased evidence, made guilt easier to assign and harder to disprove. A quirky and chilling detail: in some areas, trial by water was used to identify fire witches. If accused, you'd be tied and tossed into a pond. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, well, you were innocent. Congratulations. Historians now agree this was less a judicial practice and more a grim form of crowd control mixed with paranoia. In your village, no one's been thrown into the river yet. But the tension's rising. A young girl claims to have seen the widow tossing salt into the fire. It hissed like a snake, she says. An elder tries to explain that salt does that. No one listens. You try to speak up, remind folks about hearth inspections, faulty chimneys, dry thatch. Practical things. Real risks. But fear makes people deaf. And in the absence of clear cause, the need for someone to blame takes over. The priest gives a sermon about vigilance. Not just against flames, but evil in disguise. He doesn't name names. He doesn't have to. Everyone knows who he means. The village divides. Quietly. Lines drawn by glances, by who shares their water bucket, by whose door gets knocked on during patrol rounds. Children are told not to linger near certain homes. Someone paints a fire symbol on a door, not to protect, but to accuse. You watch all this unfold with a sick knot in your stomach. The fire did its damage. But this is something deeper. A slower burn. One night, smoke rises again. Just a chimney flare-up. Easily contained. But it happens near the widow's cottage, and that's enough. A group gathers. Torches are lit, not to fight fire, but to confront it. Or rather, what they think is behind it. You join them, not to accuse, but to intervene. Voices are raised. The widow stands firm, eyes fierce. She points to her water bucket, to the rake by her door, to the damp cloths she keeps ready. I've stopped more fires than you've started, she says. It's quiet for a moment. Then the blacksmith speaks. Loud. Clear. Leave her be. She's got more sense than half this lot. And just like that, the moment breaks. The torches are lowered. The crowd disperses, sheepish, miffed, or both. You breathe easier. But only slightly. The fear isn't gone. Just dampened. Like an ember buried under ash. And you know it'll flare again, the next time the wind howls and flames catch unexpectedly. But for now, you've pushed it back. Fires may be a fact of life. But how you respond, who you blame, says more about your village than any chimney ever could. And as the widow returns to her cottage, head high, you find yourself praying not just for rain or strong buckets, but for cooler heads. Because sometimes, the fire isn't in the hearth. it starts with whispers. A fire breaks out on a calm spring night, tearing through the edge of the village where homes nestle tightly together like sleepy hens in a coop. The wind is mild, the moon full, and the air carries the screams clearly. It's a nasty one, 2 homes gone, a third half charred, and several animals scattered and singed. The fire's out before dawn, but the smoke lingers in your throat, thick and sour. Then comes the question, how did it start? The baker swears it wasn't his oven. The tanner blames the lanterns from the feast. Someone mutters about a spilled oil lamp. But another voice, sharp, low, unmistakable, says, witchcraft. And just like that, the tone changes. You'd like to believe your village is beyond superstition. That after all the drills, all the rakes and relays and snow buckets, people would look to practical causes first. But fear has its own logic. And in a world where flame strikes without warning, it doesn't take much for suspicion to catch fire too. It starts subtly. A widow who lives alone and speaks to cats a bit too fondly suddenly finds herself shunned. Her chimneys watched more closely than others. Someone notes her roof never seems to catch, as if that's a crime. You see her at the well and she looks tired. Ash smudged. Her bucket's older than most, but she still fills it. Then someone else, a man with a limp and a habit of muttering to himself, has his chicken coop burned down mysteriously. He claims it was an accident. Others say he set it himself. Still others whisper that he knows curses. He insists it was foxes. No one believes him. Historians still argue whether witchcraft accusations were more common after fires. Some say fire was just another excuse in a long list of scapegoat strategies. Others believe the suddenness and destruction made it a uniquely fertile ground for blame. Fire didn't just destroy, it erased evidence. Made guilt easier to assign, and harder to disprove. A quirky and chilling detail, in some areas, trial by water was used to identify fire witches. If accused, you'd be tied and tossed into a pond. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, well, you were innocent. Congratulations. Historians now agree this was less a judicial practice and more a grim form of crowd control mixed with paranoia. In your village, no one's been thrown into the river, yet. But the tension's rising. A young girl claims to have seen the widow tossing salt into the fire. It hissed like a snake, she says. An elder tries to explain that salt does that. No one listens. You try to speak up, remind folks about hearth inspections, faulty chimneys, dry thatch. Practical things. Real risks. But fear makes people deaf. And in the absence of clear cause, the need for someone to blame takes over. The priest gives a sermon about vigilance. Not just against flames, but evil in disguise. He doesn't name names. He doesn't have to. Everyone knows who he means. The village divides. Quietly. Lines drawn by glances, by who shares their water bucket, by whose door gets knocked on during patrol rounds. Children are told not to linger near certain homes. Someone paints a fire symbol on a door, not to protect, but to accuse. You watch all this unfold with a sick knot in your stomach. The fire did its damage. But this is something deeper. A slower burn. One night, smoke rises again. Just a chimney flare-up. Easily contained. But it happens near the widow's cottage, and that's enough. A group gathers. Torches are lit, not to fight fire, but to confront it. Or rather, what they think is behind it. You join them, not to accuse, but to intervene. Voices are raised. The widow stands firm, eyes fierce. She points to her water bucket, to the rake by her door, to the damp cloths she keeps ready. "I've stopped more fires than you've started," she says. It's quiet for a moment. Then the blacksmith speaks. Loud. Clear. "Leave her be. She's got more sense than half this lot." And just like that, the moment breaks. The torches are lowered. The crowd disperses, sheepish, miffed, or both. You breathe easier. But only slightly. The fear isn't gone. Just dampened. Like an ember buried under ash. And you know it'll flare again, the next time the wind howls and flames catch unexpectedly. But for now, you've pushed it back. Fires may be a fact of life. But how you respond, who you blame, says more about your village than any chimney ever could. And as the widow returns to her cottage, head high, you find yourself praying not just for rain or strong buckets, but for cooler heads. Because sometimes, the fire isn't in the hearth. Morning dew still clings to the grass when the herald rides into the village, his horse kicking up sleepy chickens and suspicious glances. He's dusty, hunched, and has the faintly damp look of someone who's been rained on for 2 days straight and no longer cares. But he carries a scroll with a wax seal, which means he's either important or very good at faking it. He rides straight to the market square, unrolls the parchment with exaggerated flair, and reads aloud, "By decree of His Most Benevolent Majesty," you tune out for a moment. Because here it comes. The royal edict. Yes, the king has thoughts about your village's fire safety. Apparently, after a recent city blaze in some distant walled town you've never heard of, the crown is taking steps. New regulations, guidelines, preventative suggestions, which sound suspiciously like demands. Among them, no new thatch within 50 paces of a grain store. Chimneys must be swept monthly. Public ovens to be supervised by at least 2 adults. Open flames forbidden during feast parades, yes, really. The herald reads with gusto, clearly enjoying the power of his position. When he finishes, there's a polite pause. Then the blacksmith mutters, "And how exactly does the king plan to enforce any of that?" The crowd laughs. Here's the thing about royal edicts in a medieval village, they exist in a weird limbo between law and suggestion. They're technically binding, but practically ignored. Not out of rebellion, but because no one from the royal court is going to trudge 2 days through mud to inspect your chimney. Still, the scroll is pinned to the church door, because that's what you do. And people read it. And they talk about it. Which, oddly, is where it starts to matter. Historians debate the effectiveness of royal fire regulations. Some point to evidence that villages reformed layouts, enforced chimney cleanings, and even created fire wardens. Others argue that most people either ignored the rules or misinterpreted them entirely. There's a famous example of a town that banned fire near water, thinking it referred to cooking near wells. Turns out, it meant bathing near open flames. Misunderstandings were common. Sometimes comical. Occasionally catastrophic. You see the same confusion unfold now. A farmer insists that 2 adults per oven means he needs a co-baker. His wife rolls her eyes and says, "It means don't bake drunk." Another claims the no-thatch rule means he must tile his entire barn. Someone else swears he heard the edict included a ban on fire-themed songs, which he uses as an excuse to stop his brother's lute playing. The brother is deeply offended. Still, you can't deny the edict sparks change, slow, awkward, and heavily debated change, but change nonetheless. One house starts replacing part of its roof with wooden shingles. Another experiments with chimney caps made of old pots. The local kids begin pointing at smoking chimneys and shouting, "Royal violation," with excessive joy. It's not enforcement, but it's attention. And attention is a kind of safety. The priest, ever the realist, incorporates parts of the edict into his sermons. "Thou shalt not store pitch beside thy hearth," he intones, then adds, "or you'll make the angels sneeze." People chuckle. But they also move their pitch barrels. Quirky fact: some villages used the royal edicts as an excuse to hold inspection feasts, a sort of backwards compliance party where homes were checked for fire risks and afterward everyone got stew and a dance. You consider proposing it. Mostly for the stew. And then there's the issue of penalties. Technically, failure to comply could result in fines. Or stocks. Or, in extreme cases, property seizure. But no one's really sure how that works in practice. The last time a tax collector came through, he was bribed with gooseberries and left early. Still, a few people take the threat seriously and start burying flammable materials in ditches just in case. You decide to play along, at least for appearance. You clean your chimney. You tie a bucket to your well with a sign that reads, "For royal fires only." It becomes a local joke. But it also becomes a habit. And maybe that's the quiet power of these edicts, not their legal force, but their ability to insert fire safety into everyday thought. Even if the king never shows up with a measuring stick and a squad of chimney police, the mere idea of consequences nudges people toward caution. Later, you find the scroll flapping gently in the wind on the church door. It's already smudged with fingerprints and someone's drawn a little crown above the benevolent majesty. But people are reading it, talking about it, adjusting. The king may be far away, but his words have lit a small fire of their own. Only this time, it's the good kind. You don't trust torches. They flicker too much, they drip hot wax or oily residue, and they always seem to lean just a bit too close to something important. But tonight, the whole village is ablaze with them, not in flames, thankfully, but glowing softly in celebration. It's the midsummer festival. There's music, laughter, tables groan under the weight of roasted meats, pies, and suspiciously wobbly puddings. Children run wild with sticks that glow faintly at the tips. Someone's selling honeyed ale in carved gourds. It's festive. It's chaotic. It's a fire waiting to happen. And sure enough, someone lights a bonfire. It starts small, a humble pile of branches in the square's center, surrounded by cheering teens with too much energy and not enough sense. They dance around it, shouting to wake the saints, waving torches like banners of joyful recklessness. The flames crackle, rise, and for a moment, it's beautiful. Then a gust of wind changes everything. A spark jumps. It lands on a cart of straw decorations. Whoosh. It takes exactly 7 seconds for the revelry to shift into alarm. But here's the thing, your village is ready. The fire watchers, already assigned for the night, spring into action. Buckets appear from shadows. Blankets soaked earlier in the day are flung over the flames. Someone knocks the cart on its side to keep the fire from spreading. The bonfires douse temporarily, and the kids are shouted at with righteous fury. Crisis averted. Just. And it's not the first time. Festivals are notoriously risky. Anytime there's celebration, there's fire, torches, candles, oven-cooked feasts, and, of course, bonfires. And people, in their merrymaking haze, forget the rules. Or pretend they don't matter. Or simply let go a little too much. Historians note a pattern. Major medieval fires often coincided with feast days. Towns would light entire rows of torches to honor saints, march with flame-lit banners, or launch flaming arrows into the night sky for good luck. It was as if fire meant celebration, which, in turn, meant danger. Some villages tried to regulate it. A quirky case in France: no torches within 3 rooster strides of any dwelling. In parts of Germany, children had to carry lanterns enclosed in pig bladders to prevent sparks. In your village, you've tried buckets pre-filled, fire rakes placed near the ovens, and patrols tasked with gently, and not so gently, reminding revelers to stop dancing so close to the hay bales. You're part of tonight's patrol. Cloak on. Eyes squinting through the smoky twilight. Someone hands you a cup of cider, warm, spiced, and entirely inappropriate for the amount of responsibility you hold. You sip anyway. A fiddler starts a reel. Feet stomp. The bonfire's reignited, this time in a stone ring reinforced with wet earth. Kids chant around it. Fire that dances. Fire that sings. It's catchy. It's also a bit ominous. You notice an elder pouring water around the base of a nearby tent. Fire moat, she says with a grin. Just in case. It's absurd. You love it. And then there are the fire charms. During festivals, people wear tokens to keep the fire friendly. Tiny pouches of herbs, little stone pendants, soot blackened twine knotted in specific ways. You see a boy with 5 hanging from his belt like a wizard in training. Do they work? Who knows? But they remind people. And that's often enough. You patrol past the baker's table, his oven's been moved outdoors, a makeshift clay dome spewing warmth and aroma. It's tempting fate, but he's got a bucket beside it, and 2 nephews who've been assigned watch the flames duty. One's asleep. The other is poking the fire with a stick that's probably not regulation length. Progress. Someone tries to light a floating lantern. It catches, rises 3 feet, and drops onto a patch of dry grass. Immediate stompage. The lantern lives. Barely. Despite it all, despite the near misses and the questionable choices, the night feels under control. Because now, after everything, fire is not just fear. It's familiarity. A risky guest who must be watched but also respected. The village dances with it. Carefully. Historians often forget these moments. They focus on disaster, not near disaster. But tonight's success, the almost fire that wasn't, is a testament to everything you've learned. Training. Preparation. Teamwork. Mild paranoia. All of it matters. The festival winds down. Embers glow low. The fiddler packs away his strings. Children collapse in piles of sticky content exhaustion. Someone hands out ash-blackened bread for good fortune, which you accept despite your doubts about burnt flour. You douse the last torch yourself, plunging it into a bucket with a hiss that feels like punctuation. The square smells of smoke and sugar. The stars are out. No one was hurt. Nothing burned. And in a village where fire is always waiting, that counts as a victory worth dancing for. You wake before dawn to a sky painted in charcoal greys and dusty golds, the kind of morning that makes you feel like something's about to happen. And then it does, not with a shout, but a murmur. Smoke, someone says quietly, pointing toward the hills. You step outside and see it, a thin, distant plume rising from beyond the trees. Not from your village, but close. Too close. There's a hush that falls over everyone who notices. Not panic, at least not yet, but that eerie stillness that comes when people know something might be wrong and hope that it isn't. Because smoke on the horizon means someone else is in trouble. Another village. A hunting cabin. Maybe a traveling cart with a cooking fire gone rogue. You don't know. But you do know what to do. In the past, your village might have watched and waited. Now, you organize. 3 volunteers ride out toward the smoke. One of them carries a bucket, instinctively, though it won't be useful unless they find a river big enough to punch fire in the face with. The rest of you stay behind but prepare, just in case the wind shifts. Buckets filled. Ladders checked. Watch points assigned. Historians still argue how often medieval communities helped their neighbors in fire emergencies. Some claim it was rare, villages too poor or too proud to intervene. Others tell of fire chains formed between hamlets, water carried from stream to stream like lifelines. Your village leans toward the latter. As the morning stretches on, the smoke thickens. Closer now. Someone fetches the priest, not for prayer, but for his organizational skills. He's surprisingly good with chaos, must be all the sermons. You help draw a line in the dirt with a stick. If the fire crosses this point, you'll start removing thatch from the first row of houses to create a break. It's grim work, but better than waiting. The riders return around noon. It's the next village, one pants, covered in soot and sweat. Barn caught. Wind took it. Whole west side's burning. They need help. And without hesitation, people move. You're among the first wave. Riding out on borrowed mules, hauling sacks of soaked cloth, tools, and enough buckets to start a pottery shop. The road is uneven. The smell hits before the sight does, a mix of burning hay, scorched wood, and fear. Then you arrive. And it's worse than you imagined. The west side is a ruin of smoke and ruin. People running, shouting, throwing water like it matters more than gold. You jump in. No one asks who you are. No one cares. You have arms. You're moving. That's enough. It's chaos, but not without structure. They've formed chains. They've started digging ditches, knocking down fences to slow the spread. And you realize they've learned too. Maybe from the same markets, the same traveling storytellers. Fire lessons don't respect borders. quirky detail: in some places, smoke on the horizon was believed to be a warning from spirits, a call to ready yourself. Some villagers would ring bells not to warn of fire nearby, but to acknowledge the fire far away, as if sound could travel with sympathy. You don't believe in spirits, but you believe in sound. And when your village's bell echoes faintly in the distance, it feels like a promise. We're watching, we're waiting, we're ready. Hours pass. The fire dies down. Not because of luck, but because of effort. Hands, tools, grit. You leave with blistered palms and aching legs, but also a strange warmth that has nothing to do with flame. The kind that comes from doing something that matters. Back home, your village welcomes you like returning champions. Not with parades or feasts, but with quiet nods, offered bread, and someone handing you a damp cloth for your face. It's enough. Later, you stand at the edge of the square and look out across the fields, where smoke no longer rises. The air is still, peaceful. You breathe in deeply, then cough. Okay, not that peaceful. But it's done. The fire didn't reach you this time. You reached it. And that changes everything. Because now you know what smoke on the horizon means. It means you go. You're fixing your roof again when you hear the bell. But this time, it's not urgent. No shouting. No running. Just the familiar clang that says, "Everyone, gather up. We've got something to talk about." You brush straw from your tunic, climb down the ladder, and head toward the square with a dozen others already moving in the same direction. At the center, the village council stands around a table with something new, a chart. Drawn in charcoal and berry juice, it's a map of the village, crooked lanes, tightly packed homes, wells, and now, color-coded zones. Red means high risk. Blue, water source. Green, cleared of thatch. It's crude, but it's something you've never seen before. The meeting begins with the blacksmith clearing his throat. We've been through too many fires. Time we think ahead. His voice is gravel, and his arms are crossed like he dares anyone to disagree. No one does. So begins the biggest shift yet, redesigning the village with fire in mind. You watch as people nod, grumble, argue, and then slowly, one by one, offer ideas. Not grand, sweeping plans, but small, practical changes. Rerouting paths so that buckets can move more easily. Leaving gaps between homes to act as fire breaks. Building a second well, maybe. Maybe even digging a small pond. The suggestions come not from outsiders or kings, but from people who've lost walls, roofs, animals, memories. People like you. You propose raising a low stone wall around the grain store. Someone suggests moving the charcoal pit farther from the edge of the barn. And someone else, bless them, says, maybe we don't need 3 fire pits at the next festival. The village listens. Historians sometimes miss these moments, tiny, grassroots evolutions that don't make it into charters or legal scrolls. But they matter. These were the beginnings of fire codes, risk zones, and early urban planning. Not dictated by officials, but born from smudged maps, scraped knuckles, and sheer, burnt-out experience. As the meeting winds down, you hear about something even more surprising. A neighbor plans to rebuild part of his home without thatch. Instead, he'll use wooden shingles treated with lime wash. It's a little more expensive, a little more work, but a lot safer. Others murmur approval, then hesitation. Won't it look strange? One asks. Better strange than scorched, another replies. And just like that, the tide shifts. The next week, you see it happen. A roof rebuilt in gleaming, smooth wood instead of bristly thatch. A fire cart gets new wheels. Someone paints a red circle on their home's outer wall, not as decoration, but as a target zone for buckets in case of emergency. It's practical. It's a bit odd, but it spreads. Quirky detail: in some places, villagers began using painted animals as fire markers. A rooster meant well nearby. A goat meant flammable goods inside, save these first. Whether or not that helped, it added color and confusion in equal measure. One home was marked with a duck and a turnip. To this day, no one knows why. You return to your own home and begin making changes. Nothing dramatic. Just subtle reinforcements. A wider path beside the hearth. Hooks for blankets by the door. A special notch for the fire rake. You show a visiting cousin, and he scoffs, "Getting fancy, are you?" You smile. Just tired of watching things burn. The next fire? It's smaller. Contained quickly. No homes lost. And you know, deep down, it wasn't luck. It was planning. It's the result of maps. Of meetings. Of stubborn villagers who finally decided that prevention was worth the extra effort. You spend the evening sketching your own version of the village. A little dreamier. A little more organized. Maybe one day, this will be normal, villages built with fire safety in mind, not just with what's easy or cheap. But for now, even one flame stopped early is a triumph. The map is crude. The plan, flawed. But it's a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning is the most fireproof thing you can have. By now, the village breathes with a rhythm shaped by fire. The crackle of the hearth, the careful sweep of chimney ash, the creak of the bucket by the door, it's all second nature. Not paranoid. Not panicked. Just prepared. It's strange to think how far you've come. Once, you barely noticed the ember that popped from the oven. Now, you catch it mid-air, stomp it out without missing a beat, and go right back to stirring your stew. Reflex. Skill earned by heat and fear. You're sitting on the low wall outside the church when the wind shifts, carrying a scent that would have frozen your heart a year ago: smoke. But this time, it's from the blacksmith's forge. Controlled. Contained. His new chimney cap works wonders, funneling the smoke straight up like it's been trained. You smile and nod to yourself. You know the difference now. Not all smoke means danger. Not all fire is a threat. Still, you walk the square because it's habit. You check the well, bucket, rope, stone lip intact. You pat the fire cart, now boasting leather straps, smoother wheels, and a small barrel of sand. It's almost proud of itself. Kids are playing fire patrol again. They've built a fake village out of twigs and dirt and are running drills with acorn cap helmets. One pretends to be the bell. Another carries a thimble of water and yells, "Form the chain." It's ridiculous. It's also incredibly endearing. The widow, once shunned, now heads the firewatch rotation. People greet her warmly. She carries the same bucket she always has, though now it's polished and painted with a red handprint, her own design. She claims it keeps fire spirits at bay. Maybe it does. And then someone says it feels like we've beaten fire. The words hang awkwardly in the air. Because you haven't. You never will. Fire isn't a beast to slay. It's part of life. Part of warmth. Part of danger. All you can do is live with it, carefully. That's the real victory. Not eliminating the threat, but refusing to be ruled by it. The priest plants a new bell in the square, a second one, smaller, with a higher tone. It's for practice drills. For children to ring during games. For Fire Week announcements. You try it once and it clangs like a startled goose. Perfect. A traveling merchant arrives later that day, peddling fireproof ointment and enchanted bricks. No one believes him. But they buy his buckets, sturdy, well-shaped, and slightly overpriced. One ends up hanging beside your door, labeled in coal-smudged letters, just in case. Historians still wonder what it was that helped medieval villagers most. Was it better tools? Smarter layouts? Community resolve? Truth is, it wasn't just one thing. It was all of it, led and lived. You sit at your hearth that evening and reflect. The flames dance gently, confined to their stone cradle. You know this fire. You respect it. And in its glow, you see the echoes of every mistake, every lesson, every shouted warning and smoke-choked sprint. You also see what's been built, a culture of care. A community that knows how to face heat, howl, and ash, and still rebuild. And so, as the fire murmurs and the village hums with quiet, practiced peace, you breathe deeply and let yourself feel, for once, entirely at ease. The night stretches long, and your eyes grow heavy. The fire's burned down to a nest of glowing coals, warm and quiet, like the heartbeat of a resting giant. The crackles have softened to gentle pops, more lullaby than alarm now. The air is calm, still, the kind that presses close and says, "You're safe here." Outside, the wind stirs the trees, brushing their leaves like a mother smoothing a child's hair. Somewhere in the distance, a night owl calls. The village is asleep, tucked in under thatch and stone, wrapped in blankets, wrapped in peace. Your home, patched and reinforced, doesn't creak as much anymore. The water bucket glistens in the corner. The fire hook leans at the ready, even though tonight, it won't be needed. You feel it, don't you? That earned serenity. The sense of having prepared, learned, adapted, not perfectly, but well enough. You know what to do now. You know how to listen for trouble, how to respond, how to stay calm. Even your dreams feel quieter, softer, like smoke rising toward a starless sky. So breathe in, slow, steady. Let the last flickers of firelight trace patterns on the walls. Let the embers glow beneath your closed eyelids. Let your heart slow, your muscles ease, your thoughts dissolve into the hush of a village that knows how to keep watch through the dark. The fire is there, but it does not win tonight. And now, just rest.